Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie The Skin I Live in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called The Skin I Live in. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you, I am also going to give you all the information on which a platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, starcast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, and so let's start the video. The Skin I Live in, Spanish, La piel que habito, is a 2011 Spanish psychological thriller film written and directed by Pedro Almodóvar, starring Antonio Banderas, Elena Anaya, Marisa Paredes, Jan Cornet, and Roberto Alamo. It is based on Thierry Jonquet's 1984 novel Miguel, first published in French and then in English under the title Tarantula. Almodóvar has described the film as a horror story without screams or frights. The film was the first collaboration in 21 years between Almodóvar and Banderas since Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, 1990. It premiered in May 2011 in competition at the 64th Cannes Film Festival and won Best Film Not in the English Language at the 65th BAFTA Awards. It was also nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Foreign Language Film and 16 Goya Awards. Plot: plastic surgeon Robert Legard is successful in cultivating an artificial skin resistant to burns and insect bites, which he calls GAL, that he says he has been testing on thymic mice. Presenting his results in a medical symposium, he privately discloses he has also conducted illegal transgenic experiments on humans. He is forbidden to continue with his research. On his secluded estate, Legard is keeping captive a young woman named Vera with the help of one of his servants, Marilia. There he continues his unofficial experiments. While Legard is out, Marilia's estranged son Zika arrives in a tiger costume and asks his mother to hide him for a few days after having committed a robbery. Seeing Vera on Legard's security camera screens, Zika mistakes her for Legard's deceased wife, Gal, and demands to see her in person. When Marilia refuses, Zika binds and gags Marilia and then rapes Vera. Legard arrives and kills Zika. While Legard disposes of Zika's body, Marilia discloses to Vera that Marilia is the mother of both Zika and Legard by different men, unknown to them. Legard was adopted by Marilia's employers, though she raised him. Zika, raised as Marilia's son, later left to live in the streets and smuggle drugs, while Legard went to medical school and married a woman named Gal. When Zika returned years later, he and Gal decided to run off together, but were involved in a terrible car crash in which Gal was badly burnt. Assuming Gal to be dead, Zika left the scene of the accident while Legard took Gal from the car. With horrible burn scars, Gal lived in total darkness without any mirrors. One day, while hearing her daughter Norma singing in the garden, Gal sees her own reflection in the window for the first time since the accident. Traumatized by the sight, Gal jumps to her death in front of Norma. In the present, Legard returns and spends the night with a complacent Vera. He dreams of the night of a wedding 6 years earlier, when he found his daughter Norma unconscious on the ground, presumably having been raped. Mentally unstable after witnessing her mother's suicide, under effects of psychosis medication, a disoriented Norma revives after an assault, sees Legard bending over her, and mistakenly believes he raped her. Developing a fear of all men, Norma spends years in a mental health facility, eventually dying by suicide as her mother had. Vera, too, dreams about the same event. A man named Vicente crashes the wedding and meets Norma. Like others at the party, he is under the influence of drugs as he walks in the garden with Norma. Norma begins to take off her clothes, Vicente kisses her, and while they are lying down on the ground, Norma suddenly has a frantic reaction to the music playing, the song she was singing when her mother died by suicide, and starts screaming. Vicente attempts to hush her screams. She bites his hand. He slaps her, knocking her unconscious. He flees the scene, unaware that Ledgard notices him leaving on his motorbike. Ledgard tracks down Vicente, kidnaps him, and holds him captive, brutalizing him, chained to a wall on bread and water to wear down his resistance. As punishment for ostensibly raping his daughter, Ledgard makes Vicente both a human guinea pig for his experiments and a physically transformed replica of his late wife. Ledgard presents a drugged Vicente on the operating table to his assistants as a sex change patient. Over a period of 6 years, Vicente complies with the experimentation to stay alive. Ledgard renames him Vera. Vicente struggles to keep himself sane. During the night, Ledgard initiates sex, but Vera tells him that it is still painful after Zeka's rape. Ostensibly going to find lubricant, Vera retrieves Ledgard's gun and kills him. Marilia barges into the bedroom with her own pistol in hand. Vera shoots and kills Marilia. Freed from captivity, Vicente returns to his mother's dress shop. Tearfully, he tells his lesbian ex-colleague, Cristina, whom Vicente had loved 6 years prior, of his kidnapping, forced sex change, and the murders. As his mother enters the room, Vicente quietly reveals his identity to her. I am Vicente. Cast: Antonio Banderas as Dr. Robert Ledgard, Elena Anaya as Vicente Guillem Pinheiro, voice, Vera Cruz, Gal, Marisa Paredes as Marilia, Jean Cornet as Vicente Guillem, Pinheiro, Vera Cruz, voice, Roberto Alamozeca, Blanca Suarez as Norma Ledgard, Susi Sanchez as Vicente's mother, Bárbara Leni as Cristina, Eduardo Fernandes as Fulgêncio, Concha Buica as wedding singer. Production: Pedro Almodóvar read Thierry Jonquet's Tarantula approximately 10 years before the film premiered. He described what attracted him in the novel as the magnitude of Dr. Ledgard's vendetta. This became the core of the adaptation, which over time moved further and further from the original plot of the novel. Almodóvar was inspired by Georges Franju's Eyes Without a Face and the thriller films of Fritz Lang when he wrote the screenplay. The director announced the project in 2002 when he envisioned Antonio Banderas and Penelope Cruz in the film's 2 leading roles, but eventually cast Banderas and Elena Anaya. The Skin I Live In was the first film Almodóvar and Banderas made together in 21 years, after having been regular collaborators in the 1980s. The film was produced through El Deseo for a budget of €10 million. Principal photography began 23rd of August 2010 and ended almost 4 months later. Filming locations included Santiago de Compostela, Madrid, and a country house outside Toledo. Music: main article, The Skin I Live In. Release: the film premiered on the 19th of May 2011 in competition at the 2011 Cannes Film Festival. Due to developments in the industry of film distribution, El Deseo decided to abandon their previous release strategy for Almodóvar's works. The director's films had in the past usually been released in Spanish theaters in the spring and internationally during the last quarter of the year. The Skin I Live In was released worldwide in the autumn. The British release was 26th of August 2011 through 20th Century Fox. In Spain, it premiered on the 2nd of September 2011. The film was released in the United States on the 14th of October the same year in a limited run through Sony Pictures Classics 12, following its American premiere at the 49th New York Film Festival on 12th of October 2011. Reception: critical response. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an 81% approval rating based on reviews from 179 critics, with an average rating of 7.5 out of 10. The site's summary reads, "The Skin I Live In lacks Almodóvar's famously charged romance, replaced with a wonderfully bizarre and unpredictable detour into arthouse ick." Metacritic assigned the film a weighted average score of 70 out of 100, based on 37 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. In May 2011, Kirk Honeycutt, writing for The Hollywood Reporter, said along with such usual Almodóvar obsessions as betrayal, anxiety, loneliness, sexual identity, and death, the Spanish director has added a science fiction element that verges on horror. But like many lab experiments, this melodramatic hybrid makes for an unstable fusion. Only someone as talented as Almodóvar could have mixed such elements without blowing up an entire movie. Honeycutt continued, "The film's design, costumes, and music, especially Alberto Iglesias' music, present a lushly beautiful setting, which is nonetheless a prison and house of horror. Almodóvar pumps his movie full of deadly earnestness and heady emotions." David Gritton notes Almodóvar reaches out tentatively into unexplored genre territory, horror. Yet, despite squirm-worthy moments, the promise of horror gives way to Almodóvar's broader, familiar preoccupations: identity, blood ties, disguises, and genetic traits. According to Gritton, a list of the story's various elements — date rape, murder, secrets, lies, mystery parents, gender ambiguity, unbreakable emotional bonds — confirms The Skin I Live In as essentially a melodrama. Yet Almodóvar's storytelling is nowhere near as shrill as it once was. As a mature artist, he has refined his skills to a point where these soap opera tropes assimilate smoothly into a complex whole. Typically for Almodóvar, it all looks ravishing, thanks to production designer Anchón Gómez and cinematographer José Luis Alcaine. All three men have the gift of investing mundane objects with a unique sheen. Here, even surgical instruments about to be used malevolently assume a dreamy, otherworldly quality. The Skin I Live In is the work of a master near the top of his game. Upon its UK premiere, Peter Bradshaw gave it 4 of 5 stars, calling it fantastically twisted and a truly macabre suspense thriller. Banderas is a wonderfully charismatic leading man. Almodóvar has found in him what Hitchcock found in Cary Grant. He is stylish debonair, but with a chilling touch of determination and menace. In an October 2011 New York Times Critics' Pick review, Manohla Dargis called the film an existential mystery, a melodramatic thriller, a medical horror film, or just a polymorphous extravaganza. According to Dargis, "It takes time to get a handle on the story, and even then your grip may not be secure, though it's instantly clear that something is jumping beneath the surface here, threatening to burst forth." Vera's plight and the temporal shifts help create an air of unease and barely controlled chaos, an unsettling vibe that becomes spooky when Ledgard puts on a white lab coat and begins doing strange things with blood. There are times in The Skin I Live In when it feels as if the whole thing will fly into pieces, as complication is piled onto complication, and new characters and intrigues are introduced amid horror, melodrama, and slapstick. Mr. Almodóvar's control remains virtuosic, and the film hangs together completely, secured by Vera and Ledgard, and a relationship that's a Pandora's box from which identity, gender, sex, and desire spring. Dana Stevens noted it was Almodóvar's first attempt to blend elements of the horror genre with the high-camp, gender-bending melodrama that's become his stock in trade. She called it visually lush and thematically ambitious, a film that unfolds with a clinical chill we're unaccustomed to feeling in this director's films. The Skin I Live In is a math problem, not a poem. Still, what an elegant proof it is. Stevens called it a meditation on profound themes: memory, grief, violence, degradation, and survival. A multi-generational melodrama slowly fused into a coherent, if wackily improbable, whole, offering aesthetic and intellectual gratification, but little in the way of emotional punch. The New Yorker ranked the film at number 25 on their list of the 26 best films of 2011. In 2024, filmmaker Quentin Tarantino named it one of the best films of the 21st century. The Skin I Live In review. Sexuality and the prison house of the self are the themes of Pedro Almodóvar's fantastically twisted new film, a luxury pulp fiction that breathes the atmosphere of the sick room. Antonio Banderas stars as Ledgard, a wealthy and brilliant plastic surgeon who, in his palatial home, tastefully furnished and equipped with its own private operating theater, is secretly experimenting on the beautiful and submissive young Vera, Elena Anaya, whose entire skin covering he is replacing with an eerily smooth artificial substance transgenically derived from pig hide. Is the prisoner his long-lost beloved wife, widely thought to have died of burns in a recent car crash, or someone else entirely, who he is surgically refashioning to resemble her? Either way, captor and captive appear to be in love, yet it is a relationship that can only end as it began, in violence. This is a truly macabre suspense thriller and a nightmare melodrama clotted and tangled with bizarre backstory. It's a body horror comedy of the kind that only Almodóvar would know how, or indeed wish to create. When I first saw this in Cannes earlier this year, Its resemblances to Hitchcock, Franju, and Buñuel were apparent. Alejandro Amenabar's 1997 movie Open Your Eyes could also be an influence, though Almodóvar might not care to acknowledge a younger contemporary. The film's storyline, together with the return of Banderas to the Almodóvar Repertory Company, must also bring to mind his 1990 film Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, which sports with the same Stockholm Syndrome ideas of love, violence, and imprisonment, still as provocative and non-PC. The Skin I Live In is freely adapted from the novel Tarantula by Thierry Jonquet, and the movie toys with literary reference. Vera reads widely in the upstairs bedroom jail cell in Legard's house, displaying great taste, being evidently an admirer of Alice Munro. In my original review, I wondered if Almodóvar might have taken some inspiration from Evelyn Waugh's 1953 novella Love Among the Ruins. On this second viewing, I felt that Gore Vidal is maybe the better comparison, and the fanatical, passionate care with which Legard repairs damaged flesh mirrors the catastrophe connoisseurship displayed in J.G. Ballard's Crash. Allusions to books are probably beside the point, though. This is a film drenched in visual and self-consciously cinematic rapture. As in earlier films by this director, there are crazed voyeuristic scenes in which the protagonist watches action unfolding on a cinema screen, a home entertainment system that is more torture than entertainment, but which holds him speechless, captivated by the obscene spectacle he himself has created. A second viewing, in fact, frees the viewer from the task of untangling the ridiculous plot and allows you just to savor the extraordinary texture of this film. The colors and surfaces contrived by Almodóvar with cinematographer José Luis Alcaine and art director Carlos Baudelaire are delectable. The most casual scene or establishing shot looks as if it has been hand-painted in the subtlest detail. This is epitomized by Vera's remarkable ersatz skin, or super skin. Did Almodóvar varnish it digitally? It is rich, creamy, without the pink quality of normal flesh, more pale ochre. It bears the same relationship to skin as AstroTurf does to grass. It does not respond to a blowtorch and looks tougher than polyurethane. What a contrast to the plausibly weather-beaten handsomeness of Legard's middle-aged skin, or indeed that of his mother Marisa Paredes, whose perennially stricken, horrified face both exemplifies and ironizes the effect this grotesque tale must have on any sane observer. The colors, particularly the color red, loom almost woozily out of the screen. Here's a movie that doesn't need 3D. And at these moments, the film is particularly Hitchcockian, a visual effect intensified by the pulsing orchestral score. The music surges and throbs. The surgical instruments and files of blood are shown with minute care. Revolvers are casually disclosed in handbags and desk drawers, and Almodóvar unveils some terrific overhead shots of crime scene tableau. Banderas is a wonderfully charismatic leading man. Almodóvar has found in him what Hitchcock found in Cary Grant. He is stylish, debonair, but with a chilling touch of determination and menace. Marilia says that at an earlier troubled time in their lives, she and her son could only come out at night. Banderas's Legard is, to quote the old expression from Central Europe, as elegant as a vampire. There will be some who find this film rather too absurd, with a whiff of shaggy dog, and some critics have found it essentially heartless. I would agree that it might not have the passion and empathy of, say, Voltaire, perhaps because women are sidelined. It is rather a tissue of surfaces, styles, and images. That tissue gives a gorgeous caress. Never doubt Pedro Almodóvar. He may not deliver a movie you like, but it will probably be a movie unlike any you've seen that year. With his latest film, The Skin I Live In, he slow plays the audience. He introduces a slightly off-kilter world, but you can wrap your mind around it. When the film gets melodramatic, you're slightly amused, but you know that Almodóvar is no stranger to that tone. Then the movie gets a little slow, a little redundant, and dare I say, a little pedestrian. And then The Skin I Live In starts building to something. You tell yourself, no, that's not going to happen. That's too fucking crazy. He wouldn't. And then the film hits you with a twist that's narratively sound, thematically fitting, and will leave you picking your exploded brain off the floor. Our face identifies us. Plastic surgeon Robert Legard, Antonio Banderas, tells an audience of medical professionals. Robert had invented a second skin in his own private medical lab and he's done it with the help of Vera, Elena Anaya, a young woman in a bodysuit that's imprisoned in his home. It's clear that she's been a prisoner for so long that she's more of a confined house guest than someone fighting to escape. Robert has repaired her skin from an unknown accident, but she's always under his treatment. The mystery deepens as we learn that the woman resembles Robert's wife, who died from burns she suffered in a car accident. She was in the car accident because she ran off with Robert's brother Zeka, Roberto Alamo, and he crashed the car. It's then revealed that his wife killed herself when she saw her disfigured face, and when she threw herself out the window, she landed in front of her and Robert's young child, Norma. Norma grows up and then she kills herself for a reason not to be spoiled by me. 10 years later, Zeka returns to Robert's home, dressed as a tiger because of carnival, but symbolically because he's a predator, after robbing a jewelry store and hoping his brother isn't too sore about the whole "I stole your woman and then burnt her to a crisp" thing, and will do some pro bono plastic surgery so Zeka can hide from the cops. So just to recap, imprisoned woman in a body stocking, brother dressed as tiger, wife and kid both dead from suicide, and plastic surgeon who has invented artificial skin. It's Frankenstein and Vertigo by way of Almodóvar. A little crazy, but it's par for the Spanish filmmaker. Things go awry with Zeka, the intruder dressed as a tiger? No. And then we cut back 6 years. Everything that has been built in the first act is stopped in its tracks, and we're treated to more tragedy in Robert's life. New characters who work in a vintage clothing store, and what appears to be a standard revenge yarn. It grinds the pacing down and drains the excitement and nuttiness from the first act. You almost start to get a little disappointed in Almodóvar. And then it hits. You may see it coming, but some part of your brain will tell you that's too crazy. Is that even possible? No, it's not going to go there. It goes there. It is one of the best revenges I have ever seen in a movie. It reminded me of Louis C.K.'s line about seeing a barrel of duck vaginas and how someone could not dominate a species more than that. Watching the revenge in The Skin I Live In, I could not think of a way one person could beat another more than they do. And it's not even equal measure revenge like the one taken in I Saw the Devil. The crime is horrible, but the criminal isn't a monster. Additionally, the revenge aspect would be slightly more powerful if we had a better sense of the criminal victim's backstory beyond their brief introduction. Antonio Banderas, Knight of Cups, Terrence Malick? And yet that's almost beside the point. Almodóvar isn't interested in examining notions of justice as much as he wants to explore how we protect ourselves and how we deceive ourselves. For Robert, skin defines us. It can guard us, it can change us, and define out identity. Furthermore, the way Almodóvar weaves in themes of imprisonment and invasion further define the notion of identity and what keeps us captive. Robert is a captive to his past, Vera is a captive to Robert, and both are captive by the skin-deep delusions they've created for themselves. Working within that framework, the twist makes sense. After working through the slight reset, Almodóvar ignites a slow burn into your mind and then blows it up. The only downside to the twist is that it's so nerve-rattling that it's difficult to regain focus on the rest of the story, and nothing afterwards can really compare. When Bruce Willis was dead at the end of The Sixth Sense, the story quickly comes to its conclusion. But it's a solid 20 to 30 minutes where The Skin I Live In must deal with the ramifications of its twist, and it will at least be an hour after you leave the theater before the film stops ringing in your head. With a Pedro Almodóvar film, we expect voluptuous sexual perversion, devious plot twists, a snaky interweaving of past and present, all painted on a canvas of bright colors with bold art and clothing. His latest film, The Skin I Live In, does not disappoint. Though I usually take pleasure in Almodóvar's sexy darkness, this film induces queasiness. What it provides is a glossy, smooth, luxurious version of the sorts of unspeakable things that occupied classified classic horror films involving mad scientists' body parts, twisted revenge, personal captives, and hidden revenge. Usually such films are stylistically elevated enough that there's an irony involved, a camp humor. Although camp is not unknown to Almodóvar, here he maintains an emotional intensity showing that his bizarre story must be taken seriously. Yes, there is a mad scientist, the driven, brilliant Dr. Robert Ledgard, played by Antonio Banderas with rare intensity. Robert is driven by his science to try to repair tears in his heart. To do this, he assumes he has the godlike right to use the bodies and minds of other people. Their sacrifices are necessary to heal his pain. As the film opens, he holds the beautiful Vera, Elena Anaya, captive in his huge mansion in the Spanish city of Toledo. She has every luxury except freedom. She is dressed from toes to chin in a flesh-colored costume that looks like a compression suit. She has a stack of books, a routine of yoga, around-the-clock service, everything but her freedom. She is not his patient, but his prisoner, and perhaps she believes there are only two ways to free herself: suicide or forcing the doctor to fall in love with her. She is narcissistic enough to know how beautiful she is, and seduction is a challenge to her. We learn pieces of the backstory. Robert's young wife was horribly burned in a car accident. His specialty has become face transplants. I have performed 3 of the 9 in history, and nothing has given me more satisfaction. I briefly thought Vera was his wife, but no, she's dead, and Vera was kidnapped. He watches her on closed-circuit TV like an artwork and seems intent on using plastic surgery to create an ideal woman who will be, to put it plainly, fireproof. There's much clinical detail involving laboratory work, cloning, the blood of living pigs, and sheets of newly grown skin. Some sequences could come from a documentary. This program of surgery is embedded in a plot so devious that the audience knows more than Robert ever does. For example, the identity of his mother and his brother. That's Almodóvar for you. It makes no difference who those people are or whether Robert knows it. Pedro is just thickening the soup. There is also a rape the nature of which Robert misunderstands, and the faithful older housekeeper Marisa Paredes, who all mad scientists are required to have on staff, and Zeka, Roberto Alamo, a man dressed as a tiger, who comes to the house and explains to Marilia that he is a wanted man and must be given sanctuary. Only during Carnival can he move through the city disguised as a tiger. And Vicente, Jean Cornet, who Robert kidnaps for mistaken reasons and holds captive in the basement. You see how this film could have starred Vincent Price. It looks so silky. Few directors have used colors, especially red, as joyfully as Almodóvar. Every scene vibrates. There is passion, but not chemistry. Although we believe Vera actually does hope to seduce the doctor, his feelings for her seem psychopathic, not sexual. He wants to prove something. The full depth of his depravity is revealed in the unexpected final sequence when we discover that Robert's emotional engine is fueled not by lust, jealousy, or anger, but by a need to treat others as his scientific playthings. Robert is an unwholesome character. The feelings of others mean nothing to him. That he expresses them on the rich canvas of Almodóvar lends them a superficial beauty, but he is rotten to the core. This film must be credited with expressing exactly what Almodóvar wanted to say, but I am not sure I wanted to hear it. The 3-star rating is a compromise between admiration for the craftsmanship and the acting and disquiet about the story. A reveal that radically alters audience perspective. I will not be divulging it here, but it is the resulting thematic implications that make up my admiration. The basic plot involves an innovative plastic surgeon, Antonio Banderas, who has a kept woman, Elena Cruz, in his house against her will. The audience enters this situation in media res of what looks like a dynamic that is years into its existence. The film starts out vague and eventually falls into a flashback, which explains the circumstances of the why, when, and how it all came to be. A big reason the unmentioned reveal works, despite being able to figure it out before its disclosure, is because it lends some much-needed layers to the proceedings. The first third is meant to litter the audience with questions to hook us into one to know what is going on and how this situation that has clearly been normalized by the characters came to be. That element of intrigue never grows organically out of these scenes, and they misuse critical time that could have been spent truly grabbing the audience and establishing meaningful characterization. With that, the film gets off to a rickety start. An example of a scene that does not do what it could is a set piece that takes place about half an hour in Marisa Paredes. plays a shady matriarchal figure in what could have been a much juicier role for one of the filmmakers. Great regular whose son Zika, Roberto Alamo, pays her an unexpected visit without giving anything away. The way this scene plays out should have slowly ratcheted suspense before giving way to the setup's conclusion. Could have had the audience on the edge of their seats, akin to the opening scene, in Inglorious Bastard, not to insist that the set piece should have been exactly like that, but it provides an example of a situation that slowly reveals itself simultaneously to the audience and characters and finds suspense through that alliance. Instead, the scene, while interested, just sort of plays out without reaching that sense of suspense that it clearly means to have. Another major factor of disappointment is the way it essentially wastes former male muse Antonio Banderas, granted to see him back in action with the Spanish director that helped catapult his career back in the day, is an unbridled. Joy Banderas was always usually given darker characters to play in their collaborations, and this case is no different. The actor does a wonderful job with what he is given to work with, but unfortunately it is not much his character somehow gets lost amidst everything, and we never get a sense of him. His actions suggest some potentially incredible characterization, but the filmmaker never goes there. Banderas' more than capable star presence is dependent upon too much to carry his character through, if only Pedro Almodóvar had stepped outside of his comfort zone. His aesthetic will always be a feast for the eyes and will more than carry its weight in worth and skill, but there is a twinge of sadness that he did not branch out even slightly within the horror territory. In fact, the skin I live in hardly even feels like a horror film. For some, this will be a great thing, showcasing how he can make any kind of material his own that is fine and without having hoped for something too dissimilar. I still was optimistic for a fusion between melodrama and horror that does not exist here. There is a lot to admire here, and even a disappointing. Film by this director is more than worth seeing. Elena Anaya as Vera Cruz give a smashing performance in a really difficult part as she emotes through her self-consciously porcelain beauty. The sharp use of strings in Albert, a Glacia score, is perfection and perfectly in tone with the film. He uses a different sound that evokes Twin Peaks during a fabulous scene featuring windy back roads. This is the music used in the trailers. The way Almodóvar uses nudity and sexual assault are unprecedentedly remarkable. It is thematically rich, and on that level has a lot going on and does not disappoint. It is sprinkled with greatness throughout, despite missing the mark as a whole. In many ways, it demands one sees it twice. A film should be able to carry its weighty impact on a first viewing, but it almost feels like there cannot be a true assessment on general thoughts without seeing it again. In fact, it is probable that the film would mean more if one knows what is going on. And I fully acknowledge that despite its misgivings, the film holds throughout, goes to some pretty fantastically implicit territory, and features the filmmaker's reliable skill level. A lot of expectation comes with the Pedro Allo of our film, and he falls short here of creating a great work. Though inklings of it can be seen, ultimately the skin I live and feels somewhat hollow, too obsessed with surface beauty to get under the skin of the title and into the meat of things. Pedro Almodóvar's career has been about transitions. Over the last 40 years, he has fluctuated from the renegade whose camp and transgressive sensationalism imagined a Franco-less Spain as in Labyrinth of Passion 1982, to a mature filmmaker who openly confronts his country's tragic national history, as in Parallel Mothers 2021. The director has dabbled in seductive and darkly comic tales about killers Mador 1986, psychopathic kidnappers Time Me Up, Time Me Down 1990, and rapists Kika 1993, but he also has a penchant for satire Dark Habits 1983 and screwball comedy Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown 1988. Throughout his Vard career, Almodóvar has centered his queer male gaze on women whom he portrays with as much depth and sensitivity as Ingmar Bergman or Woody Allen. And to whatever degree Almodóvar fluctuation through an array of genres might be seen as metacrosis, The director's touches remain unmistakable, every alloy of our film, whether it's a sex comedy meant to liberate his audience or a sobering drama about unearthing the past, bears his signature. Even so, there's never been another allo of our film quite like The Skin I Live In, a complex thriller that, much like the filmmaker's career, transitions from one kind of movie to another, shifting the audience's sympathies in unexpected and challenging ways. Officially, Almodóvar based The Skin I Live In on French author Thierry Junet's novel Tarantula, a book published in 1984, just as notions of transgender identity and sex reassignment surgery had started to be discussed by mainstream culture, but both Junet and the Spanish director owe a debt to French filmmaker Georges Franu. Horror masterpiece Eyes Without a Face, 1960, all three texts involve talented surgeons carrying out medical procedures to transform their respective victims into replacements for their disfigured or dead daughters. Doc Ginser and Frange's film evokes sympathy from the viewer as an obsessed father who desperately tries to restore his living daughter's face after an accident he caused in Tarantula, and by extension Almodóvar's film His Second Afterlife, Flesh, 1997, not based on an original idea. The surgeon hopes to replace his daughter by carrying out a series of operations on her rapist. A curious blend of horror and medical sciences subsists beneath the surface of Almodóvar's film, which leaps between genres. Along with the influence from Mary Shelley and George Bernard Shaw, the film slithers between a kidnapping yarn, erotic thriller revenge story, and body horror. The film reunites Almodóvar with Antonio Banderas. Their previous collaboration 20 years earlier was Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, where Banderas played an obsessive lunatic who kidnaps a former porn star, and in a flourish only this director could pull off. The two fall in love. The Skin I Live In crafts a similar scenario. Banderas gives one of his best performances as another kidnapper of sorts, and his character falls for his victim once more, but Almodóvar's sensibilities have changed from the John Waters-style exaggeration of his 80s work, and Banderas wasn't around for the transition. The Malaga-born actor left Spain for Hollywood in the early 1990s, performing in an over-the-top commercial expressivity scene in Desperado, 1995, Assassins, 1995, and The Mask of Zorro. 1998, Pedro wanted me to develop the character through of interpretation. Banderas told New York Magazine to make him a kind of minimalist object which clashed with my natural animal tendencies. The result is something Banderas had never done at that point, an interior character who, not unlike his victim, wears a mask, though his mask consists of clinical superiority and coolly rendered abuses of power. The actor has only been better in Almodóvar's later Pain and Glory, 2019, reigniting their trusted collaboration. The director molds his actor into a methodical scientist and vengeful father. Banderas plays Robert Ledyard, respected surgeon with a secluded Toledo, but surfaces always give way to something more entrenched and psychological in Almodóvar cinema, and beneath Robert's facade is a merciless Dr. Frankenstein having lost wife in a fiery car crash that left her entire body scarred, prompting her to commit suicide. Robert hopes to prove that splitting pig and human flesh will supply a durable, even fire-resistant alternatives, so he performs illegal procedures in his private lab testing his radical transgenic technique. He experiments on a beautiful patient, Elena Anaya, keeping her inside an antiseptic bedroom in his house, trapped in a room with barred windows and locked doors, supposedly for her protection. The patient must wear a skin-color compression suit. She passes her days with yoga and the art of French feminist sculptor Louise Biesse, sculpting her own contorted figures reminiscent of Bijia art to reconcile her changing physical IDE and titty. Meanwhile, Robert watches her on a massive monitor in his bedroom next door, like a window into the next room, Crow enamored and obsessed as usual. Almodóvar informs every detail of The Skin I Live In. Production designer Anan Gomez, art director Carlos Bodin, and set decorator Vent Diaz create geometric clinical spaces of controlled gray, accented by vivid paintings with fleshy colors and curves. Robert's home looks as though his interior decorator tried to offset a doctor's office aesthetic with corporeal figures and splashes of color. Later, the chilly modernist design gives way to crimson sprays of blood across bed sheets, chaotic and unhinged in the manner of Jackson Pollock. Fine art is everywhere as ever in Almodóvar films. Note how Robert's patient reclines on a sofa like Angra Grande Odalisque, the curvatures of her torso and hips creating an alluring and painterly shape. The image is echoed by Robert's enormous paintings by Guo Perez Villalta and Titian depicting women reclining on a dian in the same classical posture as a source of masculine desire in a nod to Franu. Almodóvar shows us how Robert rebuilt his patient with the help of a semi-transparent plastic mask that stabilizes her face, a haunting evocation of Edith Scab from Eyes Without a Face, albeit less doll-like. Scab's character has an aloof, ethereal quality. Robert's patient feels urgent and trapped, yet she is so precious to Robert as a medical subject, a deeply disturbing object of desire and a site of revenge in true Almodóvar fashion. The film's pulpy first half spirals in unpredictable ways. The initial assumption is that Robert has somehow kept this wife alive but is elated because his genetic experiments are illegal and that their marriage has since soured, but the details remain unclarified. At first enter the hulking Zika, Roberto Alamoth, the other illegitimate son of Robert's living mother and housekeeper Anaya Marisa Peach. She arrives after a robbery, donning a full tiger get-up for carnival, as a disguise insisting that his mother hides him while inside Zika spots the imprisoned, recognizes her as Gal, Robert's supposedly dead wife Zika, and Gal had once planned to run away together, but the fiery crash they were both involved in left her nearly dead. Zika breaks down the patient door and ravages her. A disturbingly animalistic scene until Robert appears and shoots him dead after disposing of the evidence. Robert and his patient share a bed and dream of their rest perspective, past the plot, maneuvers through time with fluid ease, flashing back and then returning to the futuristic present of 2012. It's a structure that rewards additional viewings and amounts to a brilliant piece of narrative gamesmanship on Almodóvar's part, changing how his audience feels about the characters. Take Robert, who has much in common with Dr. Jesher, the mad scientist from Eyes Without a Face. Both have been marked by tragedy and driven to prevent anything like that from happening again. For Robert Gal's suicide mirrors the suicide of his daughter, the socially anxious Norma Blanca Suarez. Robert's flashback reveals that he took her to a posh party where Viente, Jen Cornette, a budding artist on ecstasy, raped her. The incident worsens Norma's condition and eventually compels her to leap to her death out of a hospital window. Robert learns about what transpired, and with nothing left but his work, resolves to carry out a twisted scheme. He captures Vicente and keeps him in a dungeon-like sub-basement. Before long, Robert drugs Vente and carries out one surgery after another. He starts by removing Vicente's penis to craft an artificial vagina in its place, demanding that Vicente use a series of dilators to expand the new orifice for intercourse. He gives Vicente a face that resembles all too closely his dead wife. Gal, along with feminine features, smooth skin, breasts, round hips. He even gives Vente an ironic new name, Vera, true in Latin. What begins as an extreme form of poetic justice unfolds over 6 years, during which Viente convinces himself to become Vera and even warm up to Robert out of self-preservation. Back to the present. Vente looks like a beautiful woman, like one of the idealized objects in Robert's paintings. Robert has become an outright monster. As scholar David well observed, the flashback structure doesn't fulfill the film's opening so much as yank the bottom out from it. To be sure, the scene between Zika and Robert's patient, where Zika rapes Vente in his untested orifice, believing him to be Gal, becomes even more disturbing on a second viewing, knowing Viente maintains his outward appearance as Vera throughout the assault. Gradually, Almodóvar manages to create a troubling empathy for Vicente, admittedly the first time watching The Skin. I Live in One yearns for vengeance against the rapist and may even feel robbed of tech catharsis as the film skews any hope of moral certainty. However, in subsequent viewings, the extent of Almodóvar interest in moral uncertainties, defying the expectations of a simple revenge story, becomes sadistic, if rewarding. Almodóvar doesn't forgive Vente, nor does that he wholly condemn Robert. Rather, he challenges his viewers' capacity for empathy by presenting us with two options: a rapist or the mad scientist who kidnaps and mutilates him. The director told the Wall Street Journal, My challenge in the adaptation of the novel was to make a unique character like Robert believable. I guess that people can be horrified by him too, but I don't find him grotesque still. Almodóvar questions Robert's abuses of power, his obvious privilege and wielding of science for personal ends. Robert is a man driven by his ability to shape life. According to his will, yes, he embodies the mad scientist trope, but Almodóvar hints at his far-reaching preoccupation with control in less obvious ways, such as Robert's bonsai trees, a plant that must be groomed, shaped with wire, and manicured to reformat nature according to a new aesthetic design. In this way, Almodóvar does not judge his characters, he seeks to understand them, no matter how badly the viewer wants to project moral poles onto the proceedings. The director doesn't play into that desire by the final frames. How Almodóvar leaves his audience unable to reconcile the film's moral position. It's a choice that causes many critics and moviegoers to recoil. In his review, Roger Ebert remarked this: "Film must be credited with expressing exactly what Almodóvar wanted to say, but I'm not sure I wanted to hear it merciless." Revenge schemes aside, Almodóvar's scenario challenges how his viewer will think about gender by deconstructing the male gaze, the classical feminine state of being gazed upon, and a myriad of variations in between that confront how these conventional ideas came to be. The Skin I Live In asks compelling questions. Do the precepts of gender binarism apply to Vicente and Vera? Does Vera exist at all, or is she merely Robert's horrifying fantasy? Can a female identity be forced upon another? Does gender exist on the surface or underneath? Almodóvar explores these issues without settling on a single perspective about transgender identity, regardless of whether the change occurs by choice or by a madman. Instead, consider that the acts represented in the film amount to Robert's projection of what it means to be female. Indeed, looking at Robert's view of women through the Vente-Vera change supplies further insight into the character and his obsession with surfaces. Consciously or not, Robert shapes Vente into Vera. According to the schema outlined in his views on women represented in his paintings, which portray figures designed to entice the male gaze, the symbolism of skin goes even deeper. Skin is the layer through which people experience pleasure and paint the barrier between selfhood and everything else. Skin both shapes identity and remains independent of it, providing a container and a frontage to the person inside. Depending on the individual, the skin, defined as the interior others, may experience a vast expanse between the mind and body, prompting a transition. When Robert sets out to make a woman out of Vente, he creates Vera in name only, and in doing so, reveals his superficial understanding of female identity. The Skin I Live In, then, is about how patriarchal definitions of gender imprison women, how they attempt to outline gender boundaries through social control, expectation persistent, observation, and ultimately discipline, all for a surface understanding of what it means to be female author and practicing psychoanalyst. Arlene Kramer Richards observes that Almodóvar's film takes a critical look at foundational myths about the making of a woman, in that sources ranging from Adam's rib to Sigmund Freud have defined women in relation to men. For example, Eve was created in the Garden of Eden to keep Adam company and bring him pleasure, establishing a patriarchal idea about femininity subservience. Similarly, Freud argued that women experienced anxiety over the absence of a phus, an idea that suggests the primary nature of the masculine, that humanity starts with men, and women are defined in terms of masculinity or lack thereof. Robert subscribes to these narrow and traditional definitions, focusing his attention on surfaces, the skin above all. Robert has not only replaced Vente's skin with eerily plastic-looking pig skin and physically attractive features, he has promised his victim that sex will become pleasurable in this new state. This is not a form of transgender reassignment or even a Pigolin scenario. Instead, it begins as an act of revenge to castrate the rapist of his offending organ. Before taking on notes of Frankenstein, the scientist names his creation and molds him into the concept of a woman, starting with the vagina and moving outward to survive. Vente fulfills Robert's view of a woman by becoming a seductress. Using his new body to tempt his captor, herein is the rich metaphor of Robert as an enforcer of the patriarchal social codes that promote gender binarism and disparity, and Viente as an unwilling adherent to those precepts more. Disturbing is how when Robert takes advantage of his subject sexually, he has sex with the mirror image of his wife, a shadow of his daughter's rapist and his equivalent of Frankenstein's monster. Although Robert crafts a woman out, of Vente the only way he knows how, by creating a pretty surface and forcing his desire onto it, he Vicente into a woman, psychologically. Of course, Vicente's captivity, along with the many cases of abuse against him, allows him to walk in a woman's shoes, but the experience equates to an act of forced empathy and recovery for a man who has preyed on women. The Skin I Live and also retells the Greek myth of Tiresias, who experienced life as a woman. After Hera, queen of the gods, punished him for interrupting a pair of copulating snakes, when Tiresias returned to the same snake mating spot 7 years later, Hera reversed her spell and restored Tiresias to manhood. Then, as the story goes, Hera and Zeus, caught in a marital spat, argued about which gender experienced more pleasure during sex. Ever jealous and tempestuous, Hera argued that men enjoy sex more than women. Zeus believed the opposite. Who better than Tiresias, who apparently had sex during his 7 years in female form, to settle the matter with his perspective? Tiresias explained that he enjoyed sex more as a woman. Hera, upset over losing the argument, then blinded Tiresias, feeling awful about the whole situation. Zeus gave the man the abilities of a prophesier as consolation. However, nothing magical happens to Vicente. At the end of The Skin I Live In, Robert fails in forcing the transition. Gender goes deeper than the skin, and Viente has not changed beneath the surface. Seeing his missing persons picture in the paper reminds him of what Robert has done. He kills Robert, and Morelia then escapes home to his mother's second-hand women's clothing shop, living in the body of what Richards calls a second-hand woman. Since its release, The Skin I Live In has prompted think pieces of plenty and heated reactions about what the film conveys about gender and power and how those elements fit into the horror genre. Critics have compared the film to titles like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho 1960 Brian, Deal Dressed to Kill 1980, and the Sleepaway Camp slasher series, all of which use uncertain gender or transgender people as a source of scares. These films and many others like them treat transgender identities like an affront to nature, depicting them as a form of monstrosity. For instance, the razor-wielding murderer in Dressed to Kill is the feminine half of a male psychiatrist's split personality. But Almodóvar does not reinforce the link between monstrosity and transgenderism, even if his film exists in the same genre soup. His film's monster is Robert, who projects female archetypes onto Viente, but Vente never fully identifies as female. Although he bears the external components of a female body, the social construction of gender does not apply to him inside. He remains Vente and reintroduces himself under that name when reunited with his mother. If there is a tragedy in the film, it is that Vicente remains a man trapped in an artificial female body, the true horror of The Skin I Live In, and subsequently the main issue that continues to nag at many critics and moviegoers is the film's detachment, coldness, and cruelty. Almodóvar is known and celebrated for his passions for creating films that entice the viewer and invite them to enjoy. The fearless, indulgent ways that he breaks taboos, titillates, and unashamedly gives into desires, even something as potentially unsettling as "Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down" becomes a sheer pleasure to watch in his hands. His other films involving killers such as Matador and Bad Education 2004 contain an undeniable eroticism regardless of their subject matter, but his 2011 film ran counter to everything the Spanish Andante Terrible had done before, as evidenced by the lukewarm critical response, which was positive, albeit tempered. Richard Corus called it middling Pedro in his Time review, although it contains many narrative touch points found in the director's work. The trauma of a lost child, the unexpected reveal of family, ties the shifting of sympathies after an edifying flashback. It doesn't perform these melodramatic feats with the joyful abandon of his usual work. Many expected the delights of his sexy Spanish comedies, given that Almodóvar had never made a horror film before, and the result is something unexpected. Almodóvar's approach to The Skin I Live In has been described as having Hitchcockian suspense, De Palma sexual violence, and a downright Cronenbergian preoccupation with the mind-body dichotomy and transformation. To watch The Skin I Live In is to feel the separation between the mind and body, to feel trapped within a surface that may prove inadequate, faulty, and altogether not one's own. The same brand of body horror propels David Cronenberg's The Fly, 1986, the sense of being trapped inside a dissociated container, along with a disturbing element of bodily repulsion. Even the sexual acts in Almodóvar's film run counter to the usual pleasures of his work. They consist of rape, discomfort, and violations of varying extremes. But underneath the film's dermis resides Almodóvar's persistent interest in and tendency to transgress gender sexuality and desire in its many messy forms. His film bursts with details that unnerve the viewer, leaving us shaken and uneasy. Uncovering how gender goes beyond the biological, the film contains great formal beauty too. But Almodóvar does not try to gratify his audience with his story. He exposes them to something unspeakable. It is a visually and thematically sublime film and a true expression of horror in how Almodóvar has subverted his usual desirous cinema into something altogether unsettling. The Skin I Live in Spanish Lapio Cabito is a 2011 Spanish thriller and melodrama hybrid film written and directed by Pedro Almodóvar, starring Antonio Banderas, Elena Anaya Marisa Paredes, Jan Cornet, and Roberto Alamo. It is based on Cherry Junit's 1984 novel, Male, first published in French and then in English, under the title Tarantula. Almodóvar has described the film as a horror story without screams or frights. The film was the first collaboration in 21 years between Almodóvar and Banderas since Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, 1996. It premiered in May 2011 in competition at the 64th Cannes Film Festival and won Best Film, not in the English language, at the 65th BAW Awards. It was also nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Foreign Language Film and 16 Goya Awards film. Plot plastic surgeon Robert Liddard was successful in cultivating an artificial skin resistant to burns and insect bites, which he calls GAL, that he says he has been testing on thymic mice. He presents his results in a medical symposium, but when he privately discloses he has also conducted illegal transgenic experiments on humans, he is forbidden to continue with his research. On his secluded estate, Liddard is keeping a young woman named Vera captive with the help of one of his servants, Melia, due to the suspension of Yundard. His official experiments, Liddard asks Melia to dismiss the other servants while Liddard is out. Melia's estranged son, Zika, having committed a robbery, arrives in a tiger costume and asks his mother to hide him for a few days. He sees Vera on Ledger security camera screens and demands to see her in person. When Melia refuses to let him stay after she invites him in, he binds and gags her and then rapes Vera. Liddard arrives and kills Zika while Liddard disposes of Zika's body. Melia tells Vera that she, Marilia, is the mother of both Zika and Liddard by different men, a fact she has not shared with them. Liddard was adopted by Melia's employers, but was ultimately raised by her Zika, later left to live in the streets and smuggle drugs, while Liddard went to medical school and married a woman named Gal. When Zika returned years later, he and Gal ran off together. They were involved in a terrible car crash in which Gal was badly burnt. Zika had left the scene, assuming her to be dead, while Liddard had taken her from the car. In the present, Zika had mistaken Vera for Gal, something she did not deny. Thereafter, she lived in total darkness without any mirrors. One day, while hearing her daughter Norma singing in the garden, Gal accidentally sees her own reflection in the window for the first time since the accident. Traumatized by the sight, she jumps to her death in front of Norma in the Gat. Present, Ledyard returns and spends the night with Vera. During the night, he dreams of his past, specifically the night of a wedding 6 years earlier, where he finds Norma, his daughter, unconscious on the ground. Norma, who had been taking medication for psychosis, having been rendered mentally unstable due to witnessing her mother's suicide, comes to believe that Ledyard had raped her. Upon awakening with him above her, she subsequently develops a fear of all men and spends years in a mental health facility. She eventually dies by suicide in the same manner that her mother did. Vera, too, dreams about the same event. Vicente, a young man who works in his mother's dress shop, crashes the wedding and meets Norma. Like others at the party, he is under the influence of drugs. He walks with Norma into the garden. She lists the psychiatric medications she has taken. Norma begins to take off some of her clothes, stating she would be naked all the time if she could. Vicente kisses her and compliments her while they are lying down with Vicente on top of her. She suddenly starts to have her frantic reaction to the music, playing the same song she was singing when her mother died by suicide, and starts screaming. Vicente attempts to hush her screams, leading to her biting his hand. He slaps her, knocking her unconscious. He rearranges her clothes and flees the scene, looking around nervously for potential witnesses. Just before Leonard arrives, he is unaware that Leonard notices him leaving on his motorbike. Leonard tracks down Vicente and, while in disguise, knocks Vicente off his motorbike, kidnaps him, and holds him in captivity. Vicente's mother reports his disappearance to the police, but after they find his motorbike at the bottom of a cliff, they tell her he is likely dead and has been swept out to sea. Although she believes her son is still alive, her search for him remains unsolved. Meanwhile, Leonard subjects him to a vaginoplasty and later instructs him how to slowly stretch his new vagina over a period of 6 years. Leonard physically transforms Vicente into a replica of his late wife and renames him Vera. During this period of time, Vicente struggles to keep himself sane and cling to the core of his true identity, seemingly drugged on opium by Leonard after an absence of 4 years. Melia returns to work in Leader's house to look after Vera. Vicente, in the present, Leader's new relationship with Vera dismays Morelia, who does not trust Vera. Feno, one of Leader's colleagues, reads a news story about the missing Vicente and recognizes him as one of their sex change patients. He accuses Leonard of falsifying Vicente's consent and of experimenting on him. Vera, who overhears their conversation, tells Feno that she is here by her own free will, denies being Vicente, and says that she always was a woman. After Feno leaves, Vera notices a photograph of himself as Vicente attached to the news story about missing persons during the night. Leonard and Vera start having sex, but Vera tells him that it is still painful after Zika's rape, ostensibly going downstairs to find lubricant. Vera retrieves Leader's gun and kills him. Melia, alerted by the sound of the shot, barges into the bedroom with her own pistol in hand and finds her son Leonard dead on the bed. Vera, who is hiding under the bed, shoots and kills Melia. With her final breath, Melia says, "I knew it." Freed from captivity and the need to play along with Leader's whims, Vicente returns to his mother's dress shop for the first time since being kidnapped. Tearfully, he tells his lesbian ex-colleague Cristina, whom Vicente had loved 6 years prior, of his kidnapping, forced sex change, and the murders. As his mother enters the room, Vicente quietly reveals his identity to them. "I am Vicente C. Antonio Banderas as Dr. Robert Leonard, Elena Anaya as Vente Gan Pinero, voice Silver Cruz Gal Leonard, Marissa Peets as Morelia, Jan Cornet as Vicente Gan Pinero, Vera Cruz voice, Roberto Alamo as Zika Blanca Suarez as Norma Leonard, Susie Sanchez as Vicente's mother, Barbara Lenny as Cristina, Edward Fernandez as Fino K. Chaba as Wedding. Singer production Pedro Almodóvar read Terry Junit's Tarantula. Approximately 10 years before the film premiered, he described what attracted him in the novel as the magnitude of Dr. Ledger's vendetta. This became the core of the adaptation, which over time moved further and further from the original plot of the novel. Almodóvar was inspired by George Fran's Eyes Without a Face and the thriller films of Fritz Lang. When he wrote the screenplay, the director announced the project in 2002 when he envisioned Antonio Cagw in the film's 2 leading roles, but eventually cast Banderas and Elena Anaya. The Skin I Live In was the first film Almodóvar and Banderas made together in 21 years. After having been regular collaborators in the 1980s, the film was produced through El Deo for a budget of $10 million principal photography. Began August 23, 2010, and ended almost 4 months later. Filming locations included Santiago de Compostela, Madrid, and a country house outside Toledo release cast and director at the Kilm Festival premiere. From left to right at forefront, Blanca Suarez, John Cornette, Elena Anna Almodóvar, Antonio Banderas, Marisa Paredes, and John Paul Galtier. The film premiered on May 19, 2011, in competition at the 2011 Cannes Film Festival. Due to developments in the industry of film distribution, Aldeo decided to abandon their previous release strategy for Almodóvar's works. The director's films had in the past usually been released in Spanish theaters in the spring and internationally during the last quarter of the year. The Skin I Live In was released worldwide in the autumn. The British release was August 26, 2011, through 20th Century Fox in Spain. It premiered on September 2, 2011. The film was released in the United States on October 14th the same year in a limited run through Sony Pictures Classics. Following its American premiere at the 49th New York Film Festival on October 12, 2011, reception critical response on the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an 81% approval rating based on reviews from 179 critics, with an average rating of 7.5 out of 10. The site summary reads: The Skin I Live in LAX, Almodóvar's famously charged romance replaced with a wonderfully bizarre and unpredictable detour into art. House Ick. Metacritic assigned the film a weighted average score of 70 out of 100 based on 37 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews in May 2011. Kirk Honeycutt, writing for The Hollywood Reporter, said along with such usual Almodóvar obsessions as betrayal anxiety, loneliness, sexual identity, and death, the Spanish director has added a science fiction element that verges on horror. But like many lab experiments, this melodrama-addict hybrid makes for an unstable fusion. Only someone as talented as Almodóvar could have mixed such elements without blowing up an entire movie. Honeycutt continued: the film's design, costumes, and music, especially Alberto Assis' music, present a lushly beautiful setting, which is nonetheless a prison and house of horror. Almodóvar pumps his movie full of deadly earnestness and heady emotions. David Gritton notes Almodóvar reaches out tentatively into unexplored genre territory, horror, yet bite-squirm-worthy moments. The promise of horror gives way to Almodóvar's broader familiar preoccupations: identity, blood ties, disguises, and genetic traits, according to Gritton. A list of the story's various elements: date rape, murder, secrets, lies, mystery, parents, gender ambiguity, unbreakable emotional bonds. Confirms The Skin I Live In is essentially melodrama, yet Almodóvar storytelling is nowhere near as shrill as Sitanz was as amateur artist, that has refined his skills to a point where the soap opera tropes assimilate smoothly into a complex whole. Typically for Almodóvar, it looks ravishing thanks to production designer Ana Gomez and cinematographer Jose Luis Alcanil. Three men have the gift of investing mundane objects with unique sheen here, even surgical instruments about to be used malevolently assume a dreamy, otherworldly quality. The Skin I Live In is the work of a master near the top of his game. Upon its UK premiere, Peter Bradshaw gave it 4 of 5 stars, calling it fantastically twisted and a truly macabre suspense thriller. Banderas is a wonderfully charismatic leading man. Almodóvar has found in him what Hitchcock found in Cary Grant. He is stylish, debonair, but with a chilling touch of determination and menace. In an October 2011 New York Times Critics' Pick, Manola Dargis called the film an existential mystery, a melodramatic thriller, a medical horror film, or just a polymorphous extravaganza. According to Dargis, it takes time to get a handle on the story, and even then your grip may not be secure. Though it's instantly clear that something is jumping beneath the surface here, threatening to burst forth Vera-plight, and the temporal shifts help create an air of unease and barely controlled chaos, an unsettling vibe that becomes spooky when Ladard puts on a white lab coat and begins doing strange things with blood. There are times in The Skin I Live In when it feels as if the whole thing will fly into pieces, as complication is piled onto complication, and new characters and intrigues are introduced amid horror, melodrama, and slapstick. Yet Mr. Almodóvar's control remains virtuosic, and the film hangs together completely secured by Vera and Ladard, and a relationship that's a Pandora's box from which identity, gender, sex, and desire spring. Dana Stevens noted it was Almodóvar's first attempt to blend elements of the horror genre with the high-camp gender-bending melodrama that's become his stock in trade. She called it visually lush and thematically ambitious, a film that unfolds with a clinical chill we're unaccustomed to feeling in this director's films. The Skin I Live In is a math problem, not a poem. Still, what an elegant proof it is. Stevens called it a meditation on profound themes: memory, grief, violence, degradation, and survival, a multi-generational melodrama that slowly fuse into a coherent, if wacky, improbable whole, offering aesthetic and intellectual gratification, but little in the way of emotional punch. 20, the new pod. Yorker ranked the film at number 25 on their list of the 26 best films of 2011. In 2024, filmmaker Quentin Tarantino named it one of the best films of the 21st century. Film review with a Pedro Al, snacky interweaving of pasta and presentable painted on a canvas of bright colors with bold art and clothing his latest film. The Skin I Live In does not disappoint, though. I usually take pleasure in Almodóvar's sexy darkness. This film induces quiezness. What it provides is a glossy, smooth, luxurious version of the unspeakable things that occupied classified classic horror films involving mad scientist body parts, twisted revenge, personal captives, and hidden revenge. Usually such films are stylistically elevated enough that there's an irony involved, a camp humor, although camp is not unknown to Almodóvar. Here he maintains sane emotional intensity, showing that his bizarre story must be taken seriously. Yes, there is a mad scientist, the driven, brilliant Doc Robert Ledjard, played by Antonio Banderas, with rare intensity. Robert is driven by his science to try to repair tears in his heart. To do this, he assumes she has the godlike right to use the bodies and minds of other people. Their sacrifices are necessary to heal his pain. As the film opens, she holds the beautiful Vera Elena Anaya captive in his huge mansion in the Spanish city of Toledo. She has every luxury except freedom. She's dressed from to esto chin in a flesh-colored costume that looks like a comp around-the-clock Russian suit. She has a staff books a routine of yoga service. Everything but her freedoms. She is not his patient, but his prisoner. And perhaps she believes there are only two ways to free herself: suicide or forcing the doctor to fall in love with her. She's narcissistic enough to know how beautiful she is, and seduction is a challenge to her. We'll learn pieces of the backstory. Robert's young wife was horribly burned in a car accident. His specialty has become face transplants. I have performed 3 of the 9 in history, and nothing has given me more satisfaction. I briefly thought Wash his wife, but no, she's dead, and Vera was. Kidnapped, he watches her on closed-circuit TV like an artwork and seems intent on using plastic surgery to create an ideal woman who will be, to put it plainly, fireproof. There's much clinical detail involving laboratory work, cloning the blood of living pigs and sheets of newly grown skin. Some sequences could come from a documentary. This program of surgery is embedded in a plot so devious that the audience knows more than Robert ever does. For example, the identity of his mother and his brother, that's Al motive, are for you. It makes no difference who those people are or whether Robert knows it. Pedro is just thickening the soup. There is also a rape, the nature of which Robert misunderstands, and the faithful older housekeeper Anaya Marisa Paredes, who all mad scientists are required to have on staff, and Zika Roberto Alamo, a man dressed as a tiger who comes to the house and explains to Anaya that he is a wanted man and must be given sanctuary. Only during Carnival can he move through the city disguised as a tiger, and Venti Jen Cornette, who mistaken reasons and holds captive in the basement. You see how this film could have starred Vincent Price. It looks so silky. Few directors have used colors, especially read as joyfully as Al. Almodóvar, every scene vibrates. There is passion, but not chemistry, although we believe Vera actually does hope to seduce the doctor. His feelings for her seems psychopathic, not sexual. He wants to prove something. The full depth of his depravity is revealed in the unexpected final sequence, when we discover that Robert's emotional engine is fueled not by lust, jealousy, or anger, but by a need to treat others as his scientific playthings. Robert is an UNH wholesome character. The feelings of others mean nothing to him. That he expresses them on the rich canvas of Almodóvar lends them a superficial beauty, but he is rotten too. The core of this film must be credited with expressing exactly what Almodóvar wanted to say, but I am not sure I wanted to hear it. The 3-star rating is a compromise between admiration for the craftsmanship and the acting and dissent about the story. Pedro Almodóvar's controversial 2011 film The Skin I Live In is the ultimate conundrumitis beautifully shot. It has one of the finest scores. I've heard it's exciting and shocking, and yet it is deeply problematic as we celebrate the film's 10-year anniversary. I want to attempt to reconcile its troubling subject matter with some of the work that inspired it, as well as the legacy it left behind. Doing so requires that I discuss the plot of both this movie and George Fran's Eyes Without a Face 1960 in great detail. And with The Skin I Live In particular, sensitive topics will be discussed, including sexual assault and suicide. I will also be treating the film as a text referring to characters as they are in the film. For the sake of clarity, The Skin I Live In stars Antonio Banderas as Dr. Robert Ledyard, a cutting-edge plastic surgeon, and Elena Anaya as Vera, Robert's living patient, whom he keeps in lavish but locked room in his villa in Toledo, Spain. In the early scenes, Almodóvar doesn't make any attempts to mask the power dynamic at play. Vera is Robert's property. She exists at his pleasure and therefore for ours, as Laura Mulv writes in Visual Pleasure and Narrative. Cinema, the conventions within which film has consciously evolved, portray a hermetically sealed world which unwinds, magically indifferent to the presence of the audience, producing for them a sense of separation and playing on their voice fantasy. 9 indeed, one of the first times we as an audience see Vera is through a screen within the screen, as Robert gazes on her naked lounging body on an enormous television screen. Vera's image spans the wall like a living Renaissance painting. The comparison isn't made in a vacuum on the landing outside Vera's room. Full-size reproductions of Titian, Venus of Urbino, and Venus with an organist and Cupid hang prominently. Overkill. But the inclusion of the painting cements Vera's role as objective ified form, Robert's position between the viewer and the television screen, allowing him to stand in for the viewer, now free to gaze through Robert's eyes only after he enters her room. Does Robert realize that Vera, whose body he had been admiring just moments before, had actually attempted suicide, her wrists meticulously slit with pages from a Cormac McCarthy novel in an alternate universe? The Skin I Live In could be a continuation of Fran's Eyes Without a Face, though the two films are adapted from two very different novels. The similar that Almodóvar's film has to Fran's are difficult. To miss Robert like Dr. Deseo and Eyes Without a Face is a brilliant plastic surgeon obsessed with his craft, ethics be damned. In Geneser's case, the patient is his daughter Christian, whose face was horribly burned in a car accident in Skin. It is Robert's late wife Gal who was disfigured. Christian, like Gal, is forced to live in the total absence of mirrors. Both women are only able to get a glimpse of their injury in the reflection of an open window. The shock is enough to force Gal to throw herself out the same window, whereas in Eyes it is one of Dr. Deseo's victims, an unwilling donor for Christen. Skin graft that leaps from a window. One key difference between the two is in their treatment of their female protagonists. While Almodóvar spends a great deal of effort constructing an altar of sexuality around Vera, dedicating large portions of the frame to her naked body on multiple occasions, Franu chooses to exhibit Christian's femininity in a much more subtle fashion, her face seldom seen and clothed in full-length, loose-fitting garments for much of the film. Edith Scabb relies on delicate, graceful mannerisms in her performance as Christian. She silently glides in and out of scenes like a faceless ghost, oftentimes watching the actions of other characters as if invisible. There's a soft radiance to the character as we watch over the course of the film. As in an almost unspoken subplot, she loses all that binds her to this world. This distinction in how the films portray their characters is vital in understanding how Alo handles the complicated subject matter of The Skin I Live In, which starts first and foremost with the largest divergence between the two stories, the motivations of the surgeons themselves. Dr. Deseo is compelled by the guilt of having been responsible for the accident that destroyed his daughter's visage. The horror in that film comes from the obsessive control Jeanser exhibits over his daughter in his apparent attempt to restore her life. Robert, meanwhile, is driven by vengeance, kidnapping and forcing a vaginoplasty onto his daughter, Norma's rapist. The sent to whom we are introduced as Vera. Complicating matters further, Vera too is raped by Gal's ex-lover Zika, who mistakes Vera for Gal. Not only does Robert force sex reassignment surgery on Viente, he follows it up with innumerable modifications to recreate Vera in his dead wife's image. It is with this revelation, nearly an hour into the film, that we see the true story begin to take shape. Until this point, the only clear villain has been Zika, who shows up unexpectedly to the villa and is reluctantly admitted by his mother, Malia, who has worked for Robert's family for years. Zika is on the run and intends to use his mother as cover for a few days. But as soon as he sees Vera on the security monitors, he ties Malia to a chair and attacks Vera before being found and killed by Robert as they clean and cover up the murder. Malia tells Vera about Zika's history with Robert and with Gal. Gal and Zika were having an affair and planned to run off together when Zika wrecked his car, leaving Gal to burn alive. Robert saved her life, but couldn't save her skin, which haunts him to this day. That night, Vera, apparently grateful for Robert's having saved her from Zika, sleeps with him, as far as we can tell. At this point, we are shown in microcosm a story of love and redemption. Robert, having failed to ultimately save his wife, has more success with her doppelganger. The measures he had taken, the security, the surveillance, must have been an attempt to prevent a repeat of his wife's fate. Only now, as Robert and Vera lay in bed, are we sent back 6 years earlier and for the first time learn about Norma's rape at a party, first from Robert's perspective, then from Vente's. Critically, the order of events as presented sets Viente up as a victim, not an antagonist. Though he is in no way innocent by acquainting the audience with Vera for the entire first half of the movie before even learning of Vente's existence, Almodóvar ensures that in the context of the plot, his crime serves as little more than a pretext to give Robert an excuse to enact his sadistic fantasy, having successfully kidnapped V. Robert has a wide variety of tools at his disposal to enact his vengeance. Why then does he choose what he does? Robert's retribution seems to be less about bringing Vente to justice and more about a twisted strategy to turn back. The clock to reconcile with his failure to save his wife, gender, is monster, rather than any sort of iteration on the rape. Revenge genre, Almodóvar turns his attention toward the gender as monster. Trope one that has its own long and problematic history in horror, from Psycho to Dress to Kill, and Deadly Blessing to Sleepaway Camp, Insidious 2, and House at the End of the Street, and many, many more, the genre has long used gender as a fairly cheap means to shock audiences. Ordinarily, gender as monster is used as a way to explain the villain's crimes. In Dress to Kill, the killer is the dissociated female personality of a man subconsciously upset that he wouldn't allow himself sex reassignment surgery in both House at the End of the Street and Sleepaway Camp. The killers are revealed to have been abused by their guardians, who raised them as the opposite gender. On a basic level, it's easy to forgive writers for the gim. Trope gender is one of the most fundamental aspects of our identities, and so using it to otherize the antagonist is a trick that takes very little effort on the part of the writers. The horrifying consequence of this, however, is the way this otherization bleeds into the real world. Gender stereotypes, already a hot-button issue, with so many are so strongly reinforced by these fictional storylines that it is critical that writers and directors realize that by perpetuating these tropes, they do real harm to real people. To use Vicente's gender as a weapon against him, and is the principal vehicle for driving our horror rather than revealing Vicente's identity in the coda of the story, leaving audiences with a tantalizing shock ending as they exit. The theater, its placement in the second act, restructures gender as monster from derangement to punishment. On one level, this is good news. It avoids painting gender dysphoria as being responsible for the criminally insane. It also legitimizes the lived experience of transgender people, humanizing them by compelling cisgender viewers to watch in horror as a person is forced to occupy a body that is at fundamental odds with their internal identity on the other hand. Like those films before it, it uses gender as the foundation for a number of shocking revelations made throughout the gap. film firmly tapping literally into Freud's castration anxiety. These conflicting ideas are at the root of the film's tumultuous critical response. Its legacy marred by its over-the-top use of the latter to attempt to achieve the former from the opening frames, as Almodóvar manipulates the audience into viewing Vera through Robert's eyes. Freeing us to objectify her with impunity maneuvers her expectations of Vera's role in the world of the film. She is beautiful, mysterious, and hopelessly captive. We don't know why she's a patient of Robert's or why she's under constant surveillance, but we're led to believe that it is related to her suicide attempt in the opening scene rather than the other way around when her identity is finally revealed to use its naps. Those events that preceded into focus retroactively shocking us not merely for the sadistic nature of Robert's actions, but for our understanding of the relationship dynamic between him and Vera. What's challenging for this dynamic is how it seems to bow to the notion that to be female is inherently inferior to being male. This, of course, isn't stated anywhere in the premise of the film, but the implication permeates it as a male. Vicente has power. He is young, naive, and a leer with clear problems with the concept of consent only. As Vicente does, he have the power to be the attacker. Only, as Vicente, is he in control of his situation. Vera, as a female, can only be attacked, though she manages one escape attempt early on. She is quickly subdued by Robert, who never felt at any great risk. Only through Robert is she saved from Zika. And throughout the film, it is only through charm and seduction, passive methods of control, that she is ever able to gain the upper hand. But Almodóvar uses the castration of Vente as an active means of control over the character and the audience. His manipulation of the audience into seeing the film through Robert's eyes, and more importantly, seeing Vera through his eyes, Vera's identity becomes all the more horrifying, since we have been objectifying her from the very beginning of the film. Suddenly, we are acutely aware of the gaze we had been subjecting her to. Not only does Almodóvar make use of one of Mull's avenues for avoiding the castration anxiety of the male gay, that a fetishistic scope of philia, which builds up the physical beauty of the gay object, transforming it into something satisfying in itself 14 by using the camera, as previously discussed in the first half of the film, but then actively leans into that anxiety by literally castrating the object he worked to make satisfying by using Vicente's gender as a weapon against him. Robert makes it clear that he means to assert total dominance over his victim, and it is exactly this goal that is the most difficult part to swallow for L. Motivar total dominance means nothing less than the sexual relationship Robert attempts to initiate with Vera, ostensibly in an effort to replace the wife, Helos completing his cycle of revenge against Vent, against Zika, and against Gal herself, though it's possible that one could argue that it is by Vicente's experience that people might be able to empathize with the feeling that your body is not your own, is strongly feel that the sadistic treatment of Venti at the hands of Robert Ferraut weighs any message about living with a mismatched sex, rather than any coherent commentary a lot more rusish his subject matter, albeit effectively to shock audiences into the plot twists, with the unfortunate side effect of furthering the gender as monster trope in a way that only serves to enforce prevailing stereotypes at its best horror force us to confront our demons and acknowledge those sides of ourselves and our societies that we'd rather be left unsaid. At its worst, it can unwittingly reinforce harmful ideas and stereotypes. Whenever filmmakers attempt to tackle social issues, especially within horror, they must take care not to allow it to devolve into spectacle. Though I believe the skin I live in soon such spectacle-eyed is still an exciting thriller as long as you stay cognizant of the message it is sending, intentional or otherwise. Pedro Almodóvar is son of the greatest living film directors, the rightful heir to Hitchcock's throne, with his mix of psychosexual-driven dramas and an innovative storyteller who delivers uniquely crafted narratives. When Hulu notified Meth that his films were going to expire and be removed on June 20th, 27, I decided to watch all his films, including the ones that I already saw. This review is the 7th in a summer series that reflect on his films and contain spoilers. The Skin I Live In may be my favorite Almodóvar film, I each spelled incorrectly for emphasis. Usually when I see one of his films, I know nothing about the film except the title. I first heard about it when people who clearly never even heard about Almodóvar were clutching their pearls at the plot and saw this film as one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, a sign of corruption in the heart of Hollywood. A deviant work. There were plenty of spoilers, but they were wrong. A doctor performs a sex change on his daughter's rapist, makes him look like her, then rapes her. I must admit that the idea of giving the rapist his daughter's face and raping her gave me pause and was when he would have lost. But I was willing to reserve judgment because I trust Almodóvar. And the spoilers got it wrong. Honestly, if Pedro casually said that he was taking a crap and charged people to see it, I would stand online, and it would probably be more magnificent than most of the movies that exist. People who are familiar with Almodóvar's work know that simply describing his plot sounds like sensational jump-over-the-shark drill, but watching it is as if you have stumbled into a world more alive, absorbing and vibrant than the one that you live in, with the possibility of it all making sense. I knew that I would see the movie, but when and how were the variables just under 6 years later. I finally saw the film by streaming it, and I watched it almost 2 times in a row, The Skin. I live and takes our revenge fantasy of meting out justice on a rapist by castrating him and then letting him experience rape, but not by the doctor, then ends up subverting it instead. Almodóvar uses his film a terrific blend of sci-fi and horror as an empathy machine to make audiences realize how a person feels when he or she is born with the wrong gender and forced to live that lie to survive to conform to an image of how you should look and act. This analogy is also applicable to sexual orientation because of one's gender. There is an assumption that the person is attracted to the opposite sex and is expected to act accordingly. The Skin I Live and condemns society's demands on an individual's identity as cruel and insane by equating it with a mad scientist played by Antonio Banderas. Banderas' characters in Almodóvar films are not overly troubled by concepts such as consent, get away with a lot because of their sensitivity, beauty, and skills, and are usually bats hit crazy. But it is always a surprise when contrasted with Banderas' less textured American career, where we just thought he was sexy. And macho then called it a day in this film. He plays the grief-stricken and mentally disordered but successful and brilliant doctor. There is some question of whether or not he was delusional from birth, a doctor with a god complex, or if he was triggered by his wife's affair accident, then suicide, his daughter's breakdown. At witnessing her mother's suicide, being raped or sexually assaulted, rejecting her father because she thought he raped her. Then suicide because The Skin I Live In is an Almo of our film. Our image of the mad scientist is a beautiful, seductive, and enticing one. Initially, the movie introduces him as objective, sober, benevolent, empathetic, and innovatively brilliant, like his estate is not the cobweb-covered fortress of Dr. Frankenstein on a hill. His home is sumptuous, albeit a little cold. It is filled with art, specifically large images of women. His employer has so much faith in him that he has an operating theater and laboratory in his home. It is only upon closer inspection that we realize that something is wrong. Why is there a woman locked in a room with constant camera surveillance? Why is he watching her on the surveillance screen like she is another work of art? Wait, she has pig skin. If thought this was Doc Frankenstein, not Dr. Morrow, why choose at another subsequent lecture? It becomes clear that this doctor has violated the laws of nature and medicine on his estate. He can kidnap, experiment, threaten, and kill with impunity. Even from his disapproving colleagues, this estate seems to have more in common with the cursed blood-soaked earth of a southern antebellum plantation than any ordinary estate. The Skin I Live In uses numerous complex narrative techniques to allude to the land's generational curse. It is a place where the owners can be Pharaoh take a servant's child, then make him their own, while exiling another. Is Miss Ligard, the father of Darligard, Noon seems to question the ethics of a husband treating his wife. It is a place where women feel compelled to flee and eventually go mad and die. If they don't, there is even a garden, and a fall can enable conflicts play out, except it is more civilized veneer Cain versus brutal can. Brothers in Almodóvar films are never as harmonious as brothers and sisters, or sisters. The ordinary rule of law does not seem to apply to this land. Dr. Ligard is possibly just one in a long line of lards who use this estate to live out his fantasies with no regard of how it affected others. Almodóvar's films usually focus on flawed people, including pedophile priests, but ordinarily he does not equate the church with God or spirituality. The Skin I Live In, Dr. Robert Lagarde, is the first time that Almodóvar gives his audience a pessimistic view of a God figure. He demands love even after being rejected, and despite his actions deserving none bad things happen to people in his care, specifically his daughter. So his power and status benefit no one. His origins are mysterious, particularly his father. He can usually act with impunity and has the power to transform people. In Almodóvar later films the medical profession, which he depicted in earlier films as a protector, and Anaya is now an aggressive perpetrator with the power of the law. Dr. Lagarde becomes Spalian, but sculpts the Silenkerb does not Galatia the skin. I Live In's narrative unfolds in unique ways, reminiscent to Broken Embraces, but even more ephemeral. Almodóvar has the unfolding present stories told by witnesses to theirs, with either the depiction of the imagination of hearing or telling that story. Scary stories told by the fire, getting a peek into dream memories of the same events from different characters' perspectives. The film feels more like a deranged fairy tale than real iconic figures lurk everywhere. The tiger seeking to devour the phantom, mad woman in the tower, the kidnapped beauty in jeopardy locked away. The Skin I Live In is the first time that an Almodóvar film does not begin with a performance of some type. Although one can argue, then the captured beauty doing yoga on the sofa is a type of performance, since Shay is forced into that room and framed by surveillance cameras for others' consumptions. The only theater is a medical theater / he consents when others gaze at him, her and like Peppa, and women on the verge of a nervous breakdown tries to use this fascination with him, her performance to him, her advantage by returning that gaze and reflection in the viewer's desire SL. He is conscious of this power because of her identity. SL. He was the person who raped SL, sexually assaulted his daughter, and is used to manipulating women's bodies in real life and in sculpture. He is also a Polyan-type figure in the way that he tries to force women to dress, then uses that skill with her body as the weapon because of the forced and violent ambiguity of Vera Vent's existence. He must embrace his past to survive her present in Los Angeles. Times article quoted Shirley M. Lan as inadvertently dismissing issues of women of color and transgender women by urging them to find our inner democracy. Upon reading that, I thought, in this inner democracy, do I have health insurance, a living wage, autonomy over my body, an ability to live without danger from official authorities? Can my inner democracy issue checks to my outer bank account? Oh, surely you are such a Unitarian jihadist. This does not work in the real world. The Skin I Live and presents Vera Vent's yoga as her inner democracy, her ability to retain his identity and survive despite the practical limits of that practice. This inner democracy and current status as a vulnerable person does not diminish what happened in the past. I'm very surprised that so many people try to explain Viant isn't a rapist, The Skin I Live, and presents many images of rape, including a more stereotypically violent Tonanzika the tiger, who rapes Vera Venti and engages in a type of oral rape of his mother by repeatedly gagging her. Normally, I would not classify gagging as rape, but the language that Zika uses with his mother and Vera about fitting things in their orifices begs for the comparison. Vicente may not have intended to rape the doctor's daughter and did not do so if their drama not porn, so this point is debatable, but once she physically tried to get them to stop, even if that reason was not his fault, she gets triggered by a song linked to her mom's suicide-itis rape no matter what. North Carolina legislators and courts write it also could be rape depending on her mental capacity to consent. Almodóvar usually depicts miscommunication through technology, but this time he uses legal and illegal drugs. She is on prescription medicine, but Viente thinks that she is talking about recreational drugs and partying low him. Vicente may never intend to rape, but it does not mean that he is not a rapist at most, or a sexual assaulter at minimum. In earlier scenes, he sexually harasses an employee. He is the boss son, so I'm not going to say coworker, who clearly rebuffs his advances. The Skin I Live In is emblematic of Almodóvar's ability to create empathy for problematic characters, including rapists, while simultaneously not minimizing the harm of his actions by introducing the rapist to the viewer as a captive beauty and a rape victim. He correctly challenges our notions of vengeance. In reality, we don't actually want rapists to be raped, no matter what we say, while giving every character an opportunity to make a revenge fantasy come true. Almodóvar tries to give The Skin I Live In a somewhat happy ending. The employee is a lesbian and rejected Vicente when he was himself. But even though Vicente is still Vicente, he presents as a woman and now may have a chance at love, even though he will always be trapped in the wrong body, in this unofficial sequel to Talk to Her. The Benigno-like figure gets a chance at happiness with a former victim, but with her full knowledge of his past in hers, the happy ending is in jeopardy because The Skin I Live In presents an awkward question of the role that mothers play in the story. There are three mothers. Dr. Leggard mother, the housekeeper, admits to insane origins, facilitates her favorite son's sinister experiment, encourages him to kill and will do anything for him she mothers. Two monsters, there is the story of another mother who literally sees herself as a monster in the housekeeper story. She abandons her husband and implicitly her child, then has no further consideration of her child by permanently scarring her child with the vision of her death and implicitly transmitting the song trigger for self-destruction. The closest that we get to a normal mother is Vicente's mother, but she has to stop her son from sexually harassing her employee, and implicitly condones it by letting him work there. These mothers keep secrets from their children and consciously or inadvertently create self-destructive children, with one mother left standing and the audience's uncertainty to how she will respond to Vera's story. The ending is ambiguous. The Skin I Live In is one of Almodóvar's most pessimistic films. Even though it is not as purely tragic as Law of Desire and Bad Education, this movie gave Elena Anaya an opportunity to show her acting prowess as Vera, which was not as apparent in her role as a mad scientist and Wonder Woman. And the only flaw in her performance could not be helped. Her voice is too naturally feminine to be Vicente. The Skin I Live In is a battle of revenge fantasies between two shadowy, morally problematic figures, but like all Almodóvar films, ultimately the truth will come out. Most of the legendary filmmaker Pedro Alvarez's films are overflowing with warmth and color. They may touch on sensitive subject matter, but the characters within these stories are usually ones we like and want to be around. This is not the case with The Skin I Live In. Almodóvar's first foray into science fiction, SLH horror. Instead, he has made a cold, desaturated movie that is beautiful in a dark and disturbing way. The film reflects how one of its central characters has become desensitized, literally feeling nothing. Any longer, sex in this picture is not an act of love and beauty, but discomfort and suffering. There's no farce or melodrama here, unlike the rest of Almodóvar's filmography. This is a work that comes out of a dark, angry place. Robert Ledard Antonio Banderas is a successful plastic surgeon who has been developing artificial skin. This substance would make a person impervious to burns, bug bites, and other abrasions. Unfortunately, in his eagerness to learn the full potential of his invention, Ledard has illegally experimented on humans, which leads to his colleagues forbidding him to continue down this path. They do not know that Ledard has been holding a woman, Vera, prisoner. She's the human wearing his new skin, and he has no plans of ever letting her go. His only confidant is Marilla, his loyal housekeeper. Through flashbacks, we see the tragedies that have befallen the doctor, starting with his wife's disfigurement caused by an explosion after a car wreck. He struggles to save her, but fails, followed by his daughter slipping into a mental breakdown. The secret of Vera and how she came to be imprisoned in his home is the most harrowing portion of the tale, a horror story of cruelty. The Skin I Live In is a film concerned with power dynamics. Vera is constantly under surveillance. We see her many times in the movie through the eye of a CCTV camera or a massive wall-sized monitor. The woman is always under the scrutiny of Ledger's watchful eye. However, just because he can see Vera whenever he pleases doesn't necessarily mean the doctor is in control. Vera becomes aware of his gaze and will look directly into the camera at times. By the end of the picture, things lean far more toward Vera than her captor. We often attribute power to the one looking. When examining these kinds of relationships, the gaze is what holds the subject suspended in the air to be analyzed. However, there is power in commanding that attention, capturing a person's eyes. It's also a way to exercise your control in many ways. Ledard serves as an analog for Almodóvar around the time. Spanish film critics talked about how the director's work was beginning to feel out of touch with ordinary life. In the country, his increase in celebrity with recent international hits was attributed to his growth in fame, which brought money and fame, while a film like Pain and Glory deals with Alvar's internal dialogue more directly. The Skin I Live In is more interesting. The geography of the film is intentionally obscured while characters speak in Spanish. Many of the names and locations are jumbled, making to feel disconnected from Spain. Almodóvar responds to criticism that he no longer knows how to tell Spanish stories by telling a story devoid of much of Spain. While we may be quick to position Liedert as the Almod of our analog, we might look to Vera. Instead, she is the subject of the gaze. The critique, the director seems to be saying that by giving him he has power. The doctor is trying to shape Vera into what he believes she should be, but he loses Vera, retains her control. Although he certainly leaves his mark, she survives and is reconnected with her family. But how she will continue on is left up in the air. We aren't sure if Vera truly loved the man who watched her, or if it was all an act, and maybe she doesn't even know the answer to that. When talking about Pedro, Almodóvar recently, I referenced Vol as his last film. It was only afterwards that I realized that his 2009 feature Broken Embraces had completely evaporated from my memory, which perhaps suggests that the director was in dire need of a change of pace. Broken Embraces felt like little more than a recycling of themes, motifs, and ideas from his earlier work. In short, it felt tired, which is why The Skin I Live In feels like such a bracing surprise. The director's latest film is a liberal adaptation of Terry Junit's novel Tarantula, and after a couple of female-centered pictures from Almodóvar, this is a film very much concerned with the male gay and one man's obsessive control over his female subject. The film takes place in Toledo in 2012, where Antonio Banderas, reuniting with Almodóvar for the first time in 20 years, plays renowned plastic surgeon Robert Ledgard, whose experiments drive the film's plot in his remote mansion. He holds a young woman captive, using her as his guinea pig while he attempts to develop a new type of synthetic skin resistant to pain, bites, and burns. Her name is Vera Elena Anaya, and we first see her contorted into a yoga position, clad in a figure-hugging body stocking in the sparse room that doubles as her prison cell. Only one other person knows she is there, Liedert's mother, Melia. Marisa Peets, the Igor to his Dr. Frankenstein, who keeps an eye on Vera throughout the day, communicating with her over an intercom and supplying food via a dumb waiter who is Vera. What is her relationship to Ledgard, and for how long has she been trapped like this? All will eventually be revealed, but it won't be revealed here. Ignorance is bliss when it comes to a film like The Skin I Live In, so I'm going to tread carefully around the film's narrative. This is Almodóvar's darkest and most psychologically twisted film for some time, and he piles on plot developments that drive his story into increasingly disturbing territory and simultaneously test the boundaries of his audience's credulity. He leaps back and forth in time, acknowledging the excessive nature of his time shifts with an exasperated, sounding back to the present caption near the end to reveal the family trauma that has prompted Ledger to play God, and he introduces his supporting characters who will fit into the drama in unusual ways. There's Viente Jen Cornet, a young man infatuated with his lesbian co-worker, and then there's Zika Roberto Alamo, who appears dressed in a full tiger outfit, which might seem ridiculous were it to occur in any other film. The brilliance of Almodóvar's filmmaking here lies in his ability to keep us riveted even as the story some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.